Rain shimmered on the city streets that evening, coating the blacktop with a silver glow. The glass doors of the Grand Meridian Hotel swung open as Emily Carter stepped out, clutching her phone and checking the time with frustration. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble as she muttered about the endless meetings and the chaos of her day. She had been told a car was waiting for her, and she spotted it immediately. A sleek black Mercedes idling by the curb, its headlights steady and clean. The kind of car reserved for executives and important clients. A man stood beside it, tall, dressed in a dark tailored suit. He wasn't holding a sign, but he looked professional, maybe part of the hotel's luxury car service. Without looking too closely, Emily walked briskly toward him, waving impatiently. She didn't notice the calm steadiness in his eyes, or the quiet authority in the way he stood. She simply assumed. She opened the back door and slid in without a word, tossing her bag beside her and sighing deeply. The man glanced back, surprised but silent. She spoke quickly, barely looking up from her phone, telling him to take her to Westbridge Apartments. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded once and started the engine. As the car pulled away, Emily began scrolling through her messages, muttering about clients, co-workers, and deadlines. The soft hum of the engine filled the silence. The man drove smoothly, effortlessly, his posture relaxed but precise. Occasionally his eyes flicked up to the mirror, observing the reflection of the young woman in the back seat, absorbed in her world of urgency and complaint. She noticed his silence after a while. Most drivers, she thought, at least tried to make small talk. They asked about her day, the weather, anything to fill the quiet. But this one said nothing. He didn't even ask which route to take. She glanced up, catching his eyes in the mirror for a moment, and said curtly that drivers should really be a little friendlier. He didn't respond, only offered the faintest polite smile before turning his attention back to the road. Emily shook her head, thinking he must be one of those stoic types who took his job too seriously. She reclined slightly, tapping at her phone again, complaining in her messages to a friend about how difficult the world seemed when no one could just do their job cheerfully. The man driving said nothing. The rain grew heavier, streaking the windshield. Streetlights reflected in long golden lines on the wet pavement. The silence stretched between them until it became almost heavy, filled only by the rhythm of the wipers and the distant murmur of city traffic. When they finally arrived at Westbridge Apartments, the car slowed to a stop beside the glowing awning. Emily looked up from her phone, relieved to be home. Before she could reach for the handle, the man had already stepped out into the rain and opened her door.
He held an umbrella over her, ensuring she didn't get wet. She stepped out, barely meeting his eyes, and said sharply that he could leave the luggage by the entrance. The concierge would handle it.
The man gave a small nod, his expression unreadable, and turned toward the trunk. Just then, the glass doors of the apartment building swung open. The concierge, a middle-aged man who had known Emily since she moved in, hurried outside, umbrella in hand. His eyes widened when he saw who was standing beside the car. "Mr. Bennett," he said with a respectful nod, his voice suddenly formal. "I didn't know you were coming by tonight, sir." Emily froze mid-step. She turned slowly, her umbrella tilting as the rain pattered around her. The name felt distant at first, like she'd heard it somewhere before. Mr. Bennett. And then she remembered. The investor. The silent partner who had recently taken over the company she worked for. The reclusive millionaire who avoided the press, who rarely attended meetings in person. The man in charge of everything she had been working so hard to impress. The driver, no, not the driver, turned to face the concierge with the faintest of smiles. "Just giving a friend a ride home," he said quietly, his voice deep and calm. "Have a pleasant evening." He looked at Emily for a brief moment, his eyes kind but unreadable. There was no trace of irritation or pride in them, only quiet understanding. Then he stepped back into the car and drove away, the taillights vanishing into the misty night. Emily stood there motionless, the rain whispering against her umbrella. Her heart pounded. The concierge, clearly trying to hide his amusement, shifted awkwardly beside her and asked if she was all right. She nodded slowly, too stunned to speak. Inside, the lobby's warm light did nothing to ease the burning embarrassment in her chest. She could still see the man's calm expression in her mind, the way he hadn't corrected her, hadn't even hinted at who he was. He'd simply played along, opened the door for her, and let her treat him like an employee. Upstairs in her apartment, she dropped her bag and sat on the couch, still drenched in shame and disbelief. She thought about how she'd spoken to him, the impatience in her tone, the way she had lectured him about smiling more, as if he were beneath her. Why hadn't he said anything? That question echoed in her mind again and again. She spent the night replaying the encounter in her head, realizing how quickly she'd judged him based on an assumption. The suit, the silence, the posture. She'd mistaken composure for servitude, quiet strength for subservience. The next morning, Emily arrived at her office earlier than usual. The staff was abuzz with rumors. The new owner had decided to visit the branch in person. She tried to steady her nerves, but her heart wouldn't stop racing. When James Bennett entered the office, everything fell silent. He carried the same calm energy, the same unreadable expression. He greeted the managers politely, shook hands, and began speaking with quiet authority about upcoming projects. When his gaze met hers, Emily felt her breath catch. He didn't show any hint of recognition beyond a polite nod. No smirk, no trace of the awkward encounter. He treated her with the same respect as everyone else, perhaps even more gently. During the meeting, when she nervously presented her report, his attention never wavered. He listened carefully, asked insightful questions, and at the end, simply said that her ideas were impressive. She thanked him softly, her voice barely audible. After the meeting, she gathered her courage and approached him privately. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. She apologized, not just for mistaking him for a driver, but for her attitude, for the way she had treated someone she didn't even know. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he smiled faintly and said that people often show who they are, most clearly in how they treat those they think are beneath them. He added that no apology was necessary, that he had learned a great deal about character from the experience too. Emily didn't know what to say. She felt her throat tighten with emotion, both gratitude and humility washing over her. He excused himself to another meeting, but before leaving, he paused and told her quietly that humility was worth more than talent in any business, and far rarer. Weeks passed, and the story faded from gossip, though it remained sharp in Emily's memory. She began to notice the people around her more, the janitor cleaning the hallway, the receptionist who always smiled, the barista downstairs who remembered everyone's order. She started saying thank you, started listening, started slowing down. She worked harder than ever, not out of fear or ambition, but out of genuine respect for the people she worked with. And though she rarely saw James Bennett again in person, she carried his lesson with her like a quiet echo that reminded her to see people fully, not through the fog of her own assumptions. Months later, at a charity gala hosted by the company, Emily stood among the crowd, dressed elegantly but with a calmness that came from somewhere deeper. When James arrived, he greeted her warmly. They spoke briefly about work, about progress, about how the company culture had shifted. At one point, she smiled and said she still remembered that rainy night, that moment of shame that changed her perspective entirely. He chuckled softly and told her that he remembered it too, but only as proof that people can grow if they choose to. They stood by the balcony, looking over the glittering skyline. She thanked him, sincerely this time, for his patience and for saying nothing when he could have humiliated her. He looked out over the city lights and said that silence often teaches louder lessons than words. The orchestra inside began playing softly, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The rain started again faintly, brushing against the windows. She thought about how much had changed since that night, how differently she saw the world now. As the evening went on, James excused himself to greet other guests, and Emily watched him move through the crowd, calm, grounded, unpretentious. The kind of man who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She realized that was what real power looked like, quiet confidence, not loud control. When she finally left the gala, she stepped into the cool night air, smiling faintly as her car pulled up. The driver got out to open her door, but this time she stopped him gently, taking the handle herself. She thanked him for waiting in the cold and asked his name. He smiled, surprised, and told her.